The drums begin, slow, steady, like a giant heartbeat. The crowd roars, thousands of voices rising into the hot sky of Tenochtitlan. And at the top of the temple, a man is stretched across a stone slab, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. The obsidian blade flashes, plunges into his chest, and with one practiced motion the priest rips out his heart, still beating, still twitching in his hand. He raises it high, blood spraying across his arms, across his face, while the body is shoved down the temple stairs, tumbling, rolling, smearing the stone red. And the crowd cheers, cheers as if watching theater, cheers as if watching sport. This wasn't a nightmare, this was faith. This was pleasure, this was power, this was the Aztec Empire. Historians often paint the Aztecs as visionaries brilliant. Architects, master astronomers, artists who built a city so dazzling that Spanish invaders thought they were dreaming. But behind the floating gardens and gold-covered palaces was something darker, something raw, primal, and merciless. Their gods demanded blood, and they gave it by the thousands. But here's the part that textbooks whisper about and priests refuse to write down. These sacrifices weren't just sacred duty, they were indulgence. They were desire. They were acts of dominance, humiliation, and sometimes twisted intimacy. Each year, a beautiful young man was chosen to play Tezcatlipoca, the god of the night. For 12 months, he lived like royalty. Women were offered to him, jewels covered his body, people bowed as he walked. He was the embodiment of divinity. But on his final day, everything turned. The same priests who pampered him dragged him up the temple steps. The same crowd that adored him watched as his chest was split open, his heart ripped from his body. The cruelest part? He knew it all along. He knew his luxury was just foreplay to his execution. The Aztecs didn't just kill him, they broke him. They made him taste power, women, and worship, only to rip it away in front of the world. But some rituals went even further into taboo. At the festival of Totec, the flayed lord, prisoners were skinned alive. Their screams echoed down the temple walls while priests peeled their flesh like grotesque garments. That dripping skin was then worn by the priests, who walked through the city, the blood of their victims still wet against their own bodies. Can you imagine standing in a market, seeing a priest brush past you, wearing the face of another man like a mask? To the Aztecs, it symbolized rebirth. To us, it is the stuff of nightmares, and then there were the children. The Aztecs believed the tears of children could summon rain. So they offered them to Tlaloc, the rain god. Little boys and girls dressed in fine clothes, decorated with flowers, led up the temple steps, terrified, sobbing. The more they cried, the more blessed the ritual. Sometimes they were buried alive. Sometimes they were drowned. Imagine being a mother forced to hand over your child, hearing their screams fade into the ground while priests chanted above. It wasn't just sacrifice. It was cruelty disguised as worship. The flower wars were another theater of horror. Wars fought not for territory but for human bodies. Warriors clashed in staged battles designed to capture, not kill. Prisoners were dragged back to the capital, paraded like trophies, then fed to the blade. Their lives were harvested like crops. Human beings became currency. And yes, there was cannibalism. It wasn't daily dining, but in certain rituals, parts of the victim's body were cooked and eaten. Flesh carved from the dead was shared among the elite. A dark communion where consuming another human being was seen as consuming divine essence. Can you picture the emperor himself lifting a piece of roasted flesh to his mouth, smiling, believing he was feasting with the gods? This wasn't starvation, it wasn't survival. It was ceremonial. It was forbidden's pleasure hidden behind holy words, but perhaps the darkest truth lies in the blending of sex and death. Some victims, particularly women, were chosen for their beauty. Dressed as goddesses, they were adored, celebrated, sometimes bedded by priests under the excuse of sacred union, and then at dawn they were slaughtered. Imagine the twisted psychology, desire satisfied, then flesh destroyed, as if climax and sacrifice were one and the same. For the Aztecs, intimacy was not separate from ritual, it was swallowed into it. Priests grew addicted to the rituals. Some accounts describe them as monstrous figures, their long hair matted with blood, their robes stiff with gore, their teeth blackened from chewing sacrificial hearts. They lived surrounded by death, obsessed with it, wearing necklaces made from human jaws, painting their temples with blood day after day. In a society where sacrifice was celebrated, who could tell where devotion ended and sadism began? And here's where the controversy explodes. Were the Aztecs truly serving their gods, or were they feeding their own darkest impulses? Were they keeping the sun alive, or were they masking lust, cruelty, and power lust in the costume of religion? Some historians argue that the sacrifices weren't about faith at all, they were about control, about terror, about reminding every citizen, every enemy, that the state owned your body, your life, and even your soul, but the empire paid the price. The brutality that kept the gods satisfied also bred resentment. Neighboring tribes, exhausted from supplying endless victims, saw the Aztecs not as holy but as butchers. When Hernan Cortes and the Spanish arrived, those tribes didn't defend the empire, they joined its destroyers. The Aztecs, who believed sacrifice kept their world alive, were undone by their own excess. Their gods demanded too much. Their empire drowned in its own blood. The Spaniards called them savages. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The conquest was no less brutal. The Spanish destroyed temples, burned people alive, and unleashed diseases that wiped out millions. The rituals ended, but the rivers of blood kept flowing. Perhaps the real horror is not what the Aztecs did, but that every empire has always found a way to justify its own cruelty. So how do we remember the Aztecs? As devout believers desperately trying to keep the universe alive? As tyrants who turned killing into entertainment? Or as reflections of our own darkness, showing us what happens when power, faith, and desire mix unchecked? The ruins of their temples still stand silent, but if you listen closely, you can hear it, the pounding of drums, the wailing of children, the moans of women sacrificed as goddesses, the thud of bodies rolling down stone steps. The Aztecs are gone, but their shadow lingers. And the most terrifying part isn't that they existed. It's the realization that they weren't aliens, they weren't monsters, they were human, just like us, capable of brilliance, and capable of horrors we dare not admit. So ask yourself this, when we condemn the Aztecs for their twisted rituals, are we really condemning them, or are we staring into a mirror, terrified of the truth that every civilization hides behind its gods, its politics, or its flags?